It's very rare for a sequel to top the original. So does Moana 2 do it? What's going on, guys? I'm Chris and welcome back to another video. So today I've got my review of Moana 2. This is the sequel to 2016's Moana, which is like one of the most watched movies of the past decade. Crazy that movie came out 8 years ago already. Time's flying. But before I give you my thoughts on this new movie, be sure to hit that like button and comment your expectations or thoughts on the film down below if you've seen it. And of course, subscribe to that notification bell to help reach my goal of 150,000 subscribers here on the channel. It will mean a lot. So as I do with every big review, I'm giving you some context on my experience with Moana. I didn't see the first movie in theaters. I actually watched it on streaming or Blu-ray after the fact. I think I actually blind bought the film and I watched it and I loved it. It feels like it's pulled straight from the Disney Renaissance era, which to me is the most magical era of Disney filmmaking, at least in the animation department. It has a banger of a soundtrack, it's visually stunning, and it is like a modern classic Disney animated film. I rewatched it before this movie and I was like, yep, still holds up. I have a review posted on my Letterboxd, which you guys should go follow me on Letterboxd at Filmstock if you're not already. So going into this film, I did not expect it to reach the level of Moana because that's just a really tall task in and of itself, right? But then you dig into the backstory of the development of Moana 2 and some red flags are raised. Most notably, Moana 2 was initially going to be a Disney Plus television series, but then Bob Iger became the new CEO of Disney yet again, and he said, let's change some things up. He said, let's focus on sequels for already existing hits, such as like Toy Story 5 was greenlit, Zootopia 2 was greenlit. Moana 2 was one of those projects, so they scrapped the TV show and instead went the route of making it into a movie, and that was the biggest concern I had coming in. Was this going to feel like something that was originally meant to go to Disney Plus and they sort of, mushed it all together to make it into a movie? And in a sense, my fears came true, but I do want to start with my pros for Moana 2. First and foremost, it's just great to be back in this world. They actually expand some of the lore within the world of Moana. Here we are in the year 2024 talking about Moana lore, who would have thought? But it feels a lot larger, all right? It's not just the one island that Moana and her family on. There's a lot of other things going on out there in the ocean, around the world, and they really tap into that, making for a sequel with a larger scale, but also bigger stakes, like world-threatening issues with our main villain. So things get a little more intense here in the sequel, and with that comes more sequences of beautiful animation to a certain extent. I will say most of the scenes on the water look pretty stunning, just like in the first film, but I wasn't as wowed visually. More on that later. When you go to Moana 2, you want to see more Moana, and she shines here. She's a standout Disney character of this modern era. She's such a strong leader, and her as a character, she's come so far since the beginning of that first Moana film. Really is just a good influence to all of those around her. She's very easy to root for, and honestly, she's a great role model for kids out there today, I think. Like, she is an icon, a new icon for Disney, and I believe, 10, 20 years from now, people will look back on her the same way they look back on some of the iconic Disney princesses of the Renaissance era, even though Moana is not a Disney princess, and they make a joke about that in the movie. It's quite funny. Of course, The Rock is back as Maui here, one of the standouts of that first film. I mean, who hasn't listened to You're Welcome on a loop on Hawks? Come on, we've all done it. But he doesn't have as big of a role as I would have hoped for, and I'll touch on that as I get into the cons. And I just gotta say real quick, I think Moana 2 will be a hit. I think the movie has a chance to be maybe the highest grossing this year. It's gonna land with kids, it's gonna land with families, it's gonna play really well with an audience around the holiday season, but to me, I just don't think it holds a candle to that original. But if I even take a step back and look at it as its own film, just a Walt Disney Animation Studios product, it's pretty underwhelming. And I'm going to move into the cons now. It's a bummer I have to do this, but I just found this movie to be almost wholly unnecessary. The main plot itself feels paper thin and strung together. Calling back to what I mentioned earlier, you can tell this was going to be a TV show. And it's not just the plot itself, which feels strange. There are a lot of awkward cuts, almost like where they had maybe an episode planned to end and then they just roll right into another scene. Felt a little off-putting to me. Like, it almost feels as though some of the sequences were created and ready to go on Disney Plus, and then they came back in and animated some parts that they had to add in for the movie. So to me, I would feel like one scene was made for a TV show, one scene was made for a movie, and there was almost a quality difference. Now, obviously, I mentioned up front how some of the animation is stunning, and you would expect that in a Disney film, right? But some of it was off-putting to me. It's a very minor thing. It's not something I'm going to harp on too much. I just noticed it, and I'd love to hear if you guys picked up on that as well, or if I'm just a lunatic, because that could very well be the case. And while The Rock's back as Maui and the main actress, whose name I'm not going to butcher here, who plays Moana, is back in their voice acting roles, they don't have as much time to shine on screen together as I would have hoped for. And that was really disappointing to me because I thought, again, their chemistry carried the first movie in a sense. It's kind of the heart of that whole film. And here, I just found that they didn't have enough scenes together, and it was noticeable. It's almost like they wrote Maui in last second, and it was bizarre. For like the majority of this movie, it seems like the two aren't together. And on top of that, a lot of the main ideas present here feel rehashed from the first movie. It does feel like they, took the plot structure of the first movie and said, hey, let's hit on these major beats again. So it feels like a lot of recycled ideas, and I do feel like they had to go that route because, again, this was going to be a Disney Plus show originally, and so they said, let's make this fill out like an hour 40 runtime to make it movie length, when in reality, the movie probably could have been like 60 minutes long. But perhaps the most shocking element of this entire movie to me is how musically lackluster the film was. There's not a single memorable song in this film to me, and they all feel like weird recycled versions of some of the songs from the first film, but just missing the Lin-Manuel Miranda flair. Like, I have no desire to go load up the soundtrack from Moana 2 and listen to it. When I first watched Moana, I couldn't get enough of that soundtrack. Multiple bangers were on that soundtrack. In fact, it's like a no-skip soundtrack. Here, it's almost an all-skip soundtrack, and that's not what you want in a big Disney film where you're gonna have musical numbers. They gotta land with people, and to me, this movie didn't have the juice musically. I felt like Lin-Manuel Miranda's presence was greatly missing, and that kind of just takes a hit on the overall quality of film for me. And getting back to the structure, which I've kind of harped on already, I think this movie just comes off really choppy as a direct result of the fact that it was once going to be a TV show. There's a main villain in this film who we barely even see, who has very little depth, and it's almost convoluted to the point of like, who is the villain of the film for the first 30 minutes? And then it goes just the generic play it safe route of almost rehashing the last act of the first Moana at the end. It just felt really repetitive and unnecessary. I can't emphasize that enough. This entire movie kind of just feels like Disney saying, hey, let's capitalize on the success of Moana, both theatrically, but also the fact that it's like the most streamed movie of the past decade. Both of those factors play into the fact that we got this movie, but is there really a compelling story to tell here? Is there a need to return to this world? Not really, and that's on display here. That's evident here. If you're going to bring both Moana and Maui back, have them be at the forefront, but they make an interesting decision here instead and say, you know what, we're going to introduce a new batch of side characters here who just aren't the most interesting. In fact, they're fairly boring and underdeveloped, but they're going to be a part of this new crew with Moana. I was just like, why are they getting so much screen time? We don't even know who these people are. They weren't even in the first movie. If they were like side characters in Moana 1 who came back for this movie, I'd be like, okay, I get it. But they aren't even in the first movie. There's like 3 or 4 new characters in this movie, and it's just a little jarring to have to get to know everyone and care. Because to me, it's all about Moana and Maui, and I don't even remember their names, the newbies. So at the end of the day, Moana 2 is a disappointment to me. I can't lie. There's still enjoyment to be had at the surface level, right? There's some music that plays, and it's gonna hit for some people probably. It didn't work for me. Some of the visuals hit, some don't, and you get to see Maui and Moana on screen, albeit way less than in the first film, but it's still a Disney movie. You kind of know what you're getting into. It's a bit predictable. It's not a bad time by any means. I don't abhor this movie. I just think that it's flawed and doesn't hold a candle to the first, which is very disappointing. I mean, Moana 2, like I said, is gonna make probably $1 billion. People are gonna eat it up. It's just not really my jam, especially when compared to the first. I'll just go back and watch that first movie and be satisfied. No need to really revisit this sequel. It's basically just an inferior shell of what the first movie was at the end of the day. But that does it for my review of Moana 2. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, as well as your expectations if you have not yet seen the movie. Hit that like button, subscribe to that notification bell, and stay tuned for more content coming very soon. But thank you guys, as always, for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.